Hi.
Michelle, how are you doing?
These got to be like the comfiest little chairs on stage ever.
We can take a nap after.
We could.
Thanks everyone for coming. So we're here to talk today about Canada's changing fundraising landscape and maybe a few other things.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk about this topic. So just as you heard from Aidan, I mean, Michelle's had an incredible past, serial entrepreneur, civil engineer degree, and an MBA from Queen's, my alma mater as well. TV star, you may have seen her in a little show called Dragon's Den. She's been in the business of coffee, caviar, coupons, and now Clearbanc. She also worked for Sears.
Just things that start with C.
Yeah. So what's so interesting about the Clearbanc story is, you know, while many entrepreneurs come on Dragon's Den to pitch Michelle and her fellow dragons, she was actually inspired by the patterns she saw in those pitches to help turn Clearbanc, which she runs with her partner, Andrew D'Souza, into one of Canada's hottest fintechs. So that's a real drive-by summary. For those of us here who don't actually know what Clearbanc is, can you give like the 1-minute pitch? I'm in an elevator going from 20 to 1. Tell me about Clearbanc.
Yeah, so our goal is to be the best way for founders to capitalize their company. And so today, founders are basically left with two options. They can go to a bank, they can take a personal guarantee on their assets, and they can get capital from a bank. Or, more likely, they go to equity investors today, where they give up a piece of their company, a piece of control, and most importantly, in a process that typically takes 3 to 6 months to raise capital. And so our view is that we can do that far better with the help of data, and to do that in a way that's totally transformational to entrepreneurs. So our product is called the 20-minute term sheet. You should be able to give us your data, and in 20 minutes, we should be able to tell you how much we can invest and on what terms. And we do that all with non-dilutive investments. And so we really pioneered, you know, these revenue share agreements in the market, which is we give you capital, take a portion of revenue until we get paid back, typically plus 6%.
It's like a cash advance, right? Like you give me $100,000, I have to give you back $106,000 or $108,000, something like that.
Exactly. So it's a revenue share. So I really got this idea. It was so funny, and it took a few iterations to get here. But I remember being on Dragon's Den, and one of the things that most people don't know about the show is we sit in those chairs and see 10 pitches a day for 17 days straight. Like, that is a lot of pitches. And so you're basically seeing the same thing over and over again, which is founders coming on the show, giving up a huge portion of their company to basically go buy Facebook and Google ads, what is growth today. And I just remember seeing these guys that had made these, you know, wooden iPhone cases. Everyone can imagine this company. They're like father-son team, done $1 million in sales, and they're on the show, and they're like, we have great unit economics. We make each case for $10, got $10 in Facebook ad spend, and we sell these guys for $50. And, you know, we want $100,000 for 20% of our company. And there was just something about that pitch where I was like, this is such a bad deal for both the founders and the investors. Like, for me as an investor, this company is not going to sell to Apple at a 10 times multiple. That's not kind of what this e-commerce company is. But these guys have great unit economics, and they should have a way to grow. And so on the show, it was actually that deal. I was like, look, I'll give you the money. Instead of taking, you know, any equity, I'll just take a portion of your revenue until you pay me back, plus 6%. And it really wasn't a debt product. There was no personal guarantee. There was no fixed payment timeline. There was no compounding interest. This should be the most founder-friendly deal in the world, where if you use my capital to grow, you have a bigger company, and I get paid back a little faster. And if the company slows down, I just wait that out for the journey.
What would have been interesting is if one of the dragons had turned to you and said, and I'll take 20% of your company, Michelle.
Well, we didn't know. And that's, I think, one of the most interesting parts about the Clearbanc story is, you know, I've sold this company to Groupon. We're brainstorming new ideas in Chicago as we're there. You know, we start thinking about how do we build, you know, financial services for all of these online businesses that are popping up, right? And so we looked at Uber drivers and Airbnb hosts, and, you know, I'd done this deal on Dragon's Den, but didn't really think much of it. And it was so funny because we hired a guy named Tanai, and we were like, look, why don't you call a couple e-commerce companies and see if this is interesting? And like, that's literally all we gave him. We gave him a laptop too. He had that. And I don't think we would have ever guessed this business would have become this big.
So what was Clearbanc originally? It had a very different model starting out, I think, what, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah, so we started in 2015, and that was exactly where we started. We said, look, there's all of these new, fintech is gonna be very transformative. Like, I did believe we were entering an era where for the next 10 years, we were gonna see mass disruption in fintech, because the customer expectations was just a huge delta from where, banks and any financial institutions were delivering. But then we were like, look, all these online businesses are popping up, Uber and Airbnb. We built a product for Airbnb hosts. We built a product for Uber drivers. And it was actually this experiment that we were running based on kind of this, one Dragon's Den deal that I had done that ended up, completely transforming the company. Because what we figured out after we did a couple of these is that 40% of VC dollars go straight to Google and Facebook. So let's just let that sink in for a second. That means that founders are using the most expensive capital to do something that should be repeatable and scalable. By definition, like equity, we should use equity if we're taking true business risks. If you're, hiring 50 AI specialists to build new data science, or hiring a bunch of data scientists to create a new drug, that's great uses of equity because it's true risk there. But if you already know that you're injecting $1 and you're gonna make $4 by spending money on a Facebook ad, you should be using a different asset class than equity. And I think that's really why we've seen that we've grown so quickly in the last couple of years, and it's really resonating with founders.
By the way, just a reminder, we'll be taking some questions at the end, so if you haven't already, you can write some in on the Slido app. So when did you figure out you were really onto something? I think you said those numbers are current, right? $1 billion this year, 2000. Like, when did you think this is actually repeatable, scalable, and you've got an interesting opportunity here?
When I started talking to the founders, and I just remember this very distinct story, and it was actually one of our very first customers. He was an ex-military veteran out of Baltimore, and he had this idea to start a murder mystery subscription box. So this is like a cute idea, right? Every month you get a box to run a murder mystery party. The handwritten love letters and the clues to do this. Who knows if this would be a big market or not? And I remember we gave him $10,000. This is almost three or 4 years ago. And this guy didn't stand a chance of raising venture dollars, because the problem with the venture ecosystem today is it is based on knowing someone. I mean, let's just start here. VCs don't actually take introductions, cold emails. You have to know someone. And then the process takes forever, and then you give up a piece of control. And so this guy was, a military veteran in Baltimore. There was not a VC within 50 kilometers of him. And so we gave him this money. Today this business does almost $25 million in revenue. He owns 100% of this company. And I was like, wow, that really worked for him. Because it's been difficult for a long time for entrepreneurs to get access to capital. And the reason for this is because there wasn't good data sources. And so now that we have these, we think we can build something really special here.
So, and how do you know this is a company that you should be forwarding money to? What's the magic algorithm that you've built? What does it look at? How does it ingest the data, and how does it sort of spit out a yes or a no or an offer, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So effectively what we did is we took much of the diligence, besides the human-to-human part, that VCs were doing, and we automated that and then built data science on top of it. And so, typically VCs were looking at, especially with e-commerce companies, what is your LTV to CAC? How fast are you growing? What are your unit economics on these? And so, because we can now plug into these large data sources, processing revenue, bank account, e-commerce data and ad spend, we can get a really good sense of, what's your basket size, what are your costs on that, and what's your ad spend on it. And it was the combination of all of those. So the interesting part about all of this is that the first version of that model, Andrew and I built. And we had a pretty good sense of throwing the dart in the right place, because I had run an e-commerce company, Bytopia, for 5 years. We were completely bootstrapped. I really understood, how to think about unit economics. And so we started with that. But now we have a team of 15 data scientists genuinely, I actually can't tell you everything that's in our model today, because it changes and it gets better as we've made more and more of these investment decisions. And so I think, that's one of the power of being able to do this is hopefully we can then use that data to, help other industries and verticals. And so we're doing some experiments in SaaS, so you should all come talk to us later, and being able to fund those companies. We're looking at scaling, internationally. And then we're looking at using our own data to give founders better insights on their businesses, because we're seeing so many of them.
In building a model that sort of replicates decisions that would be made at financial institutions, then did you have to bring in, did you hire some people from Bay Street or Wall Street to actually, or just go consult them and say, well, that's the question you should ask. This is, because all models start with a human designer, I would think.
So we had to go to Wall Street to raise our capital, but we actually didn't take any of the conventional risk underwriting that was used in traditional industries. Because what happened in SMB lending is they would basically look at a company, they would say, I can't understand this, so my catch-all is I want a personal guarantee. And if your business doesn't work out, I take your personal assets. And that's how this was all done. And that is deeply, deeply unfair. I mean, I just finished reading Chip Wilson's book, A Little Black Stretchy Pants, where he talks about building Lululemon. He was at 8 stores, one of the most successful global brands, and he still put a personal guarantee on his house because he had to build out his 9th store. That is the current system that we are dealing with. And so if we use that model, it was never gonna work. And so make no mistake, 400 people on Wall Street told us we were absolutely crazy for doing this. Looked me dead in the eyes, and they said, Miss, this isn't how lending works. And that's real. And I said, no, I'm pretty sure. I ran an e-commerce company. I understand what founders are going through. And if we use data that's truly coming out of these businesses from their APIs that cannot be altered, and build data science on top of that, we will be better predictors of that. And now, we're 4 or 5 years in, and so we can prove that that was indeed the case. But I got a lot of no's in the early days. And we didn't build on conventional underwriting. We built on the stuff that VCs were using, which was very different than the risk profile that banks were using.
Right. So you're sort of like an anti-VC firm, but you've raised money from VC. Yeah. You've had all these Wall Street banks say no to you, but the way you finance the customers is you raise these sort of special purpose off-balance sheet entities that are funded by outside funders. So a couple of things at play there. For a company that's positioned itself as an alternative to VC, why are VCs, why have they invested in you? And when you finance a VC-backed company, do the VC say, hey, no, don't touch those guys? So that's one question. And the second question is, if you're going to grow and you're going to scale, you're going to need to raise serious capital. Can you just find it from kind of alternative asset managers and family offices, or do you have to go back to Wall Street and say, hey, Goldman Sachs, remember that thing, crazy idea I pitched you? We need a $10 billion special purpose vehicle to fund all these. Do you want to put in?
Okay, so that's like a ball of wax there. Let's peel that apart slowly. So let's start with the first one. We certainly have been, compared to being a disruptor and an alternative to VC, but that is very different than being anti-VC. And so the way that I think about this is, again, equity is true risk capital. If you are doing crazy product development, if you are growing into new countries, that should be where you should use equity. And so I think that's where we're using our equity dollars, and that's why we thought it was important to find equity dollars behind us that wanted to take those risks with us. But it's the same reason that we didn't raise equity dollars and give that money out as effectively debt capital. And so I think that's the first thing, is that really differentiating how you're using your money. And this wouldn't have mattered so much if half or 40% of VC dollars was basically going to Facebook and Google ads, right? That's why we could build something on top of that. Second part of your question was, well, do VCs not want to participate that? And the answer is actually the opposite. Because if you think of the standard VC, they're going to meet with 400 companies a year and probably write 4 checks. That means they've seen a whackload of companies that they don't want to be unhelpful. And so we get a ton of referrals from VCs because they see so many great companies that are maybe not a fit. Again, VC is a very high bar. You have to look at a founder in the eye and you have to say, could this company grow at 10x this year and 10x next year, because that's the asset class. The asset class is, 80% goes bust to make it, and so those two have extremely high, they have to have extremely high ceilings on them. And it's also why we see some of this negative behavior where we force companies to grow. But there's nothing wrong with a $3 million or a $20 million or a $50 million company. And so we have a different standard. And so VCs have been very good from the referral standpoint on that side. They've also been very good because if you're a VC, you care about where you are on the cap table too. So as soon as you're there, you're like, I put $10 million in and got this percentage of the company. I don't want to be diluted by the next guys. So the next time they need to raise, if they need to raise 20 million bucks, if they can just raise another 10 and then put $10 million of Clearbanc capital in there, that's actually way better for me because I'm holding my position before. So I think that's your second question.
Okay.
And then the third one is, where do we get all of our capital? And so we have certainly had to figure out, and so they're effectively funds, or they can be called SPVs, which are special purpose vehicles, but effectively what we're using is the same structure that a venture capitalist use, which is go out and raise money where we wholly own the GP and then we have LPs that put money in. And the first people that actually backed us after those like 400 no's on Wall Street, believe it or not, were other founders, because they got it. It was like the founder of Seamless, who was like, this product would have been revolutionary to me 10 years ago. And so he was the one that put together then, a group of family offices and university endowments to do this. But we certainly had to build the asset class from scratch. I mean, everyone said this does not look like something we've seen before. This doesn't look like something we've done before. And so raising capital was a huge challenge for us, will continue to be a huge challenge for us. And it becomes one of the most motivating things I do. Because every time I have to go out to market, I remember that we got pretty lucky with this company. We got the timing right and we got the market right. But there I am in 100 meetings getting 95 no's. And this is what every single founder goes through every time they go to market to fundraise. And so I get those no's, we get jerked around from people like everyone else. We have days where I'm pitching people and they're messaging someone else on their laptop and I'm like, why did I wake up at 4 a.m. to get on the 6 a.m. flight to New York to do this? So we all have those experiences and they're very motivating for me, because I think if you think about how to enable more founders globally, you have to unlock access to capital. You can do all of the education and motivation and stuff like that in the world, but the number one barrier why businesses can't grow is access to capital. And if we can make that a little bit easier, and if we can make that a little more fair, I think we can enable a lot of people globally. I mean, the last probably stat here that matters is that, today 2% of venture capital dollars goes to female founders. And in the United States, 80% of VC dollars get deployed in 4 states in America. The stat actually still blows my mind. California, New York, Texas, Massachusetts. And that's absurd, right? There's great companies that are built in all corners. And we actually even know this from conventional wisdom, because often the entrepreneurs that build the largest companies did not come from the kids with silver spoons in their mouth that went to the right schools. They came from folks that really hustled, that had a really hard time getting off the ground. And so when you look at the Clearbanc model, we funded 8 times more women than the VC industry average, which is a stat I'm really proud of. We funded founders in 43 different states in America and in every province in Canada. And so I think we're trying to make it easier, because we're saying, for the first time, you don't need to be part of the social circle to get funding.
Do you think that message, though, I mean, ultimately, again, if you're going to grow into something big, you're going to need Wall Street banks or that kind of pool of tier 1 capital.
Yeah.
And they've invested in alternative assets before. I mean, the subprime, not to associate with subprime, but there's obviously been an appetite over the years to try unconventional things out.
Totally.
Is that, where do you think you are in terms of convincing the big money to maybe get into this?
I mean, we're certainly getting there, right? I mean, this year we raised another $250 million facility, but that takes time. And it takes time to have the data show that this is working. It takes, folks that really want to understand the model to do this. And I think there's always an appetite for returns in the market, but just understanding and showing people where that return relative to the risk sits is really important.
Okay, I have one more question for you, but I want to give the audience a chance. So let's check my eyesight. There we go. This is the first question. Will Clearbanc finance B2B SaaS companies, or is financing strictly to be limited to B2C?
It's a great question. So we started, and I think we started with what we knew. I had run an e-commerce company, so I deeply understood that market and all the markets around ROAS and ad spend. But if you run a SaaS company, you have very similar things that are happening. And typically you're paying a salesperson instead of often paying Facebook, especially for larger enterprise deals. And so our view is like, if you're paying a salesperson commission for a deal that's gonna be paid off to you in a year, again, you should be paying that commission with capital that's cheaper than equity. And so we've done some early experiments in SaaS. And so you should definitely come talk to us because we are looking for companies to fund in the space.
One question I wanted to ask is, this will be very relevant to a lot of people in this room, is about customer acquisition.
Yeah.
What channels do you find most effective? And can you talk a little bit about your CAC, your customer acquisition cost, and what your payback is like? And also maybe what you see in terms of deal flow and in terms of other customers coming in the front door.
Yeah, so I think we've been lucky because we've created a category that really didn't exist before. And so we've seen a lot of people find us, which we think is an amazing thing. I talked about some of the channels earlier where we get VCs that refer us a lot of different deals and deal flow, which we take on. We've built relationships with the ad platforms, with everyone else in the ad ecosystem that can help us find those people. And then, the second part of our business is that we go out and we find great companies as well. The nice part about great e-commerce companies is they all have a presence online. And so we can use a bunch of different tools to tell us, who's doing well in the space, and then reach out to those founders and really explain the product for the first time.
And in terms of the cost have you figured that out yet, or is it still kind of a work in progress?
No, I mean that's every business has that work in progress as you go. But one of the standards that we hold ourselves to, because we hold our customers to it, is that we need to make money after our cost of acquisition on the very first time that we give a company capital. And so we've been able to maintain that since inception, which I'm pretty excited about.
Okay. What's your, that's a good one. What default rate do you experience on loans? I know you'd say that's not loans, but can you talk about default rates or however you would define it?
So the first thing is, every once in a while someone will be like, well, has anyone not paid you back? And I'm like, oh yeah, that certainly happens. That's the risk we're taking, because we're not taking the personal assets of these companies, and we're using data to really determine that. And so, we don't disclose a specific default rate, but it is far lower than industry standard, which is why we've been able to grow so quickly. And again, it's back to this data story. When you use, real data for a lot of different companies, you can start to see a lot of different trends across patterns that can tell you a lot of this.
Can you give a number, or is that?
No.
Okay. What do you think about venture debt lenders that won't participate without a company first doing a Series A?
That was a part of venture debt's underwriting criteria, is that they would come in if there was an equity investor behind them. So again, that leaves behind, the 90% of companies that can't raise venture dollars. And so I think that that's, a product that exists, and we have lots of great relationships with the venture debt providers, but it is a product that is made, exclusively available to those that have already raised venture capital. So I think it's part of the solution, but I don't think it's the whole solution.
I've heard bootstrap founders grumble about it because sometimes they get to big sizes, and yet Silicon Valley Bank is, not so interested. What has been your largest investment or outlay to any one company?
That's a good question. So one of the things that I care deeply about is that we can fund small companies, and then we can grow with them. And so the smallest investment we will do is, for a company that's doing $10,000 in monthly revenue. So you can actually come to us when you're fairly small, and we can start working together. And then we can fund businesses all the way up to $10 million. And so we have a couple companies that are large that are already at that scale with us.
Okay. These are good questions. What is so, better than my questions, I think. What's so proprietary or novel about Clearbanc's lending model? It's essentially a royalty structure. Can you explain what makes Clearbanc unique?
Well, yeah, certainly, I mean, royalty structures have existed for a long time. You know, if you look at even a show like Dragon's Den, the typical royalty structure was the Mr. Wonderful deal, which is I will give you $100,000 and take 5% of your revenue forever, or those were the typical royalty deals that were done. And so I think the way we've been able to lower the cost of capital, I mean, if you think about it, like, you know, if you use our capital to buy Facebook and Google ads, we charge you 6%. So if we give you $100,000, you pay us back $106,000. But with $100,000, you're gonna make, if you inject that into Facebook and you have a 4-to-1 ROAS, you're making $400,000 in revenue. So the math is really, would you pay $6,000 to make $400,000 in revenue? And that really makes a lot of sense. And so what's really unique about Clearbanc is that this hasn't been done for the space, because all of the other investors in the space thought this was way too risky. They thought it was either, you couldn't possibly do this and make money charging 6%. You'd either need a personal guarantee to guarantee your downside protection, or you need, you know, 25% of the company to do the same thing in a board seat, which was really giving up control. So that was kind of, I think, the uniqueness of what was around. And it was something that I deeply understood, because I had been a bootstrap founder for 8 years. I mean, no one would give me money for the first 8 years of my career. It's really, really hard to do that.
I love the question at the bottom. Are any other dragons invested in Clearbanc, or are they out?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, I don't think none of the other dragons are investors in Clearbanc. And, you know, it was funny, I'm not gonna say who it was, but I did see one of my dragon colleagues. And so I had just started on the show as kind of the rookie when we were starting Clearbanc. And I remember, you know, they all kind of thought this was like, whatever, she's doing her another thing. And sometimes, you know, founders sell a company and then they kind of do like a lifestyle business, not like a, you know, this is not like where I'm gonna, you know, put my peg in the round and really try and grow something again. So I think, you know, people may have been like, okay, maybe she's just got a little project going. And it was funny because I saw one of the dragons like a week ago, and he's like, you guys are transforming Canada. And I was like, that's a big statement. He's like, I didn't think you were gonna make it. I didn't think you and Andrew were gonna make it. I didn't think the whole thing was gonna make it. And I was like, well, thanks for the honesty. So, you know, even the people that know you well, there's lots of early risks in businesses.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the great questions. We're out of time, so enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.